Following Jesus is messy. Earlier in chapter 6, for those of you who have been here, but for those who have not been in a long time, let's catch up in the book of Mark. Earlier in chapter 6, Jesus is healing people, and he's sending out his disciples to villages far and wide, 2 by 2, to proclaim and to heal. And Herod heard all about this. He heard about what Jesus and his followers are up to. And after today's reading, I'm going to step on your toes just for a minute, preacher. We've got Kathy preaching next week. But after today's reading, the disciples gather back around Jesus, and they tell him what they've done, and he tells them to rest a while, and he feeds them. But in the middle of this story, the author of Mark, or in the middle of all of this, the author of Mark he just puts this kind of dreadful story of one of the worst birthday parties I've read about right in the middle. This is one story, the only story in the book of Mark where Jesus is not the main character. He's mentioned, but he doesn't show up at all. It's as if the story's author wanted the reader to understand just how messy and treacherous life can be for the disciples, and how life can be for us, followers of Jesus. Following Jesus means standing up to power and knowing that not all endings to all stories are happy. And it's as if John's death is a foreshadowing of Jesus' death and resurrection. This story is offered to readers of ancient times, of present, and to readers in the future, of a foreshadowing of what is to come for us as Christians who follow Jesus. At the party, a young girl is manipulated by her parents in front of a crowd to dance in front of people and to become a spectacle to her guests. Her powerful and power-hungry parents put her in a situation that ended in the beheading of John. Loving one another is hard. And following Jesus, after knowing what had happened to John, makes it that much more difficult. It's hard to love people when we witness things like this. It's hard to love the person who hurt me. It's hard to love someone with unearned privileges that are not afforded to me. It's hard to love someone who doesn't see a situation the way I see it. And it's hard to love a group of people with needs when I have my own needs to meet. And that's why following Jesus is so messy. Last week after the service, you may or may not have seen members of Des Moines Police Department and Crisis Intervention Team helping out some folks who are visiting the shed work through their very real problems that come with hunger and problems that come with poverty. And as Christians, we are a community that gathers as one body, not as many bodies sitting in pews, but as one. And we are called to respond. But how do we respond in this messiness? Perhaps we can look at our baptism. When we reaffirm our baptismal vows, we promise God in the presence of friends that we will seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves. We also promise to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. A community fridge, a place to share food with people who have none, is a powerful act of justice. And it comes with the risks that poverty creates. Sometimes I wonder, wouldn't it be easier for us to just give money to an organization and not see hunger face to face? Wouldn't it be easier not to see poverty face to face? Wouldn't it be easier not seeing mental illness face to face? But then I think, where did Jesus call his disciples? He called them to spaces and places to heal, to proclaim, and to feed. When our city said that this community fridge could no longer operate in the front yard of a private residence, this community took action and welcomed this mutual aid effort onto our property in an effort to help keep people fed. But little did we know that years later, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times, that little door to the shed has opened for people to drop off and pick up food and to love one another through sharing and eating. Having this community fridge on our property has not been easy. But Jesus never promised that it would be, because following Jesus is messy. At a political rally yesterday afternoon, a young man committed an act of gun violence in an assassination attempt against former President Donald J. Trump. 2 people, including the shooter, and 2 people died, including the shooter, and 2 more people are in critical condition. May God have mercy on them all. Though a bullet grazed the ear of the former president, he is fine and able to continue with his responsibilities as a candidate running for president again. What happened yesterday is an act of political violence, and it underscores why we as Christians must continue to stand against the powers that be, against hate in all forms, and against political and against gun violence. It is important for us to remember that my neighbor, the one who votes differently than me, is not my enemy. My neighbor, the one that loves differently than me, is not my enemy. My neighbor, who sees the world differently than me, is not my enemy. My neighbor, who worships differently than me, is not my enemy. Now is not a time to proclaim to be an instrument of God's wrath, but rather an instrument of God's peace. Through generosity, through mercy, and through compassion. Fear will not save us. Even in the messiest of times in our walk with Jesus, it is love, time and again, that will conquer all.